There's something seductive about a clean theory. It, it organizes chaos. It offers certainty. It makes, it helps make pain make sense. You read something, a book, maybe a Reddit post or a tweet, and suddenly your confusion feels like it has a name. Your suffering seems explainable, and your heartbreak, just a function of hypergamy, right? Your loneliness, evolutionary mismatch. Your rejection, modern dating or algorithms or late stage capitalism or the death of the masculine. And in that moment, you exhale because now it's not personal, it's systemic, it's cultural, it's theory. And it seems safer that way, safer than sitting in your rawness, safer than feeling the sting of being unwanted, safer safer than admitting that you tried and weren't chosen. So the theory becomes a balm, and then it becomes a framework, and then it becomes armor. At first, it feels like insight, but over time, it becomes insulation. And so you stop grieving and you start diagnosing. You stop connecting, and instead you start categorizing. And what began as a tool for clarity becomes a fortress to keep people out and to keep your own heart at bay. That's what this episode is about. Not the theory itself per se, but the function that it begins to serve when it stops being a lens and instead starts becoming a wall. Because the truth is, we've all done it, I think. We've all used belief to avoid feeling. And we've all grabbed hold of an idea when reality felt too overwhelming. We've all constructed like these mental scaffoldings around our hearts and said, this is what's going to protect me. But emotional armor doesn't just protect, though. It isolates. It keeps out harm, yeah, but it also keeps out help as well. And it shields from the pain, but it also connects. No, it actually blocks the connection, right? It makes you feel safer, but not necessarily more seen, and eventually it just turns you inward. The theory that once gave you insight becomes this thorn. It digs into your sense of self, and it rewrites your narrative. It starts whispering that your pain is inevitable, that your loneliness is inescapable, and your rejection is preordained. And so you start to believe that people don't love deeply anymore, that no one wants commitment, and that vulnerability is this trap, and that hope is simply naive. But here's the thing. Most people who cling tightly to ideology aren't necessarily trying to dominate. They're trying not to fall apart, and for good reason. Because to let go of the belief would mean facing the feelings that were underneath it in the first place. And that's the grief. That's the anger. That's the longing that was there, the ache of being misunderstood, right? It was the years of being the one who is left out or left behind or looked over. Those emotions, they are massive. And most of us, we've never had someone safe enough to hold them with us. And so we learned to hold them alone until holding them became too heavy. And so we grabbed a theory, something that was simple, right? Something that was structured, something smart. And we said, this is why I feel the way that I do. Which at first feels like a sense of freedom, but soon it became the only story, right? The only voice, the only way to make sense of anything. And that zone of rigidity, it starts to cost you. It costs you softness. It costs you nuance. And it also costs you in your relationships, because People can feel it, even if they don't know how to name it. They can feel when they're being spoken to or spoken at. They they can feel when there's no room for disagreement or for emotion or even for grace. And they can feel when a belief system has replaced vulnerability. And that's when they start to pull back. Not because not because your ideas are wrong, but because your presence no longer feels open. And that's the heartbreak. Because most people who lead with ideology aren't cold. They're they're scared. They're scared to be hurt again. They're scared to need, right? Scared to hope. Scared to say, I still want to be loved, even though I've stopped believing that it's possible. And so they put on the armor, and the armor works, yeah, until it doesn't. Until the silence gets too loud. Until the relationships stay surface level, right? Until you've realized that people aren't really connecting with you. They're just navigating around your defenses. And that's when the theory becomes a thorn. Not because the ideas are bad per se. No, it's because they've stopped serving your wholeness. And these ideas are no longer liberating you anymore. They're instead limiting you. So what do you do when you realize that the armor isn't working anymore? Where do you begin? I think the first step is recognizing what your ideology is actually protecting you from. Not what it claims to explain, but what it's actually helping you avoid. Is it shielding you perhaps from heartbreak? Or is it shielding you from shame? Or perhaps from the raw grief of a story that didn't unfold the way that you needed it to? Sometimes not even your sometimes it's not even your ideology that you're subscribing to. It's the one you've inherited from a podcast or a friend or a culture or a YouTube rabbit hole that you went down that promised clarity in the sea of chaos that you're in. And to be fair, it probably worked, didn't it? At least at first. It gave you words. It gave you someone to blame. It probably gave you some sense of structure when all you had before was just the confusion and the pain. But here's the problem with the emotional armor. It doesn't grow with you though. It's rigid by design. It's meant to lock out or to fortify or to keep intrusions at bay. But intimacy is an intrusion, isn't it? Intimacy just breaks right in. It softens. It requires this space or room for another person's reality alongside your own. And ideology, when it's used as armor, it leaves no room for that. Like you start filtering every conversation through this theory that you find compelling. And you stop listening and instead you start analyzing. And you treat connection like a debate and wonder why people keep backing away from you. And yet you're still lonely, still aching for someone to see behind the ideas, still hoping that someone might be willing to sit in the rawness beneath your arguments, still wondering why the theory that once felt like salvation now feels more like a sentence. So let me be clear. It's not wrong to have beliefs. No. It's not wrong to look for frameworks that help you navigate the world. But when your beliefs start to flatten your feelings, and when your framework leaves like no space for your full expression of your humanity, and when the truth becomes like an excuse to stop risking connection, That's when it's time to pause a moment. Because the most dangerous armor is the kind that doesn't look like armor. It instead looks like conviction. It looks like confidence. It's the kind that looks a lot like logic. Like you've done your research, you've done your homework, right? It looks like you're finally in control. But deep down, you do know better. You know that you haven't let anyone in for a very long time. You know that behind this facade, behind every confident explanation, there is still a quieter question, which is asking, what if I'm just not as lovable? And the scariest thing is this: you've gotten good at listening and hiding behind yourself. You don't feel numb, you just feel empowered. You don't sound defensive to yourself, at least you just sound informed, right? And you don't seem to be afraid, but you seem like really certain. But certainty, it can be a drug, and in high doses, it makes you forget what it's like to be in a relationship instead of just being in control. So what does it look like to begin again? To take off that armor you've been wearing, not all at once, but in slow increments. It starts with this honest question: when did I stop letting myself feel? Are you able to trace that? Was it a moment perhaps of betrayal? Or was it a season of rejection? Was it because of a breakup that you never really had time to process? Or maybe it was a cultural moment where vulnerability felt really dangerous. Name it. And then another question is, what have I gained from this armor that I've been wearing, and what has it cost me? Maybe you gained the ability to walk through the world without falling apart. And maybe you even gained a sense of identity. Perhaps you gained some experience of protection from the sting of wanting too much. But what did it cost you? Did it cost you the chance to actually be seen, or to be held perhaps, or to be asked how your heart is doing? Not your theory, not your worldview, but your actual heart. Because that's the wound that the ideology can never touch or address. That's the pain that no podcast could rescue you from. That's the ache that no argument can resolve. It's the ache of being human, of wanting to experience love, of losing it, of wanting it again after you've lost it, and being terrified even to admit that. The ache that needs something deeper than intellectual mastery, if you will. It needs honest grief. It needs real anger. It needs raw longing. And those things are hard to feel when you're suited in steel. So what do? Well, you begin to loosen this framework. You allow moments of softness, even if they don't match your ideology. You tell someone that you're struggling, even if it contradicts your persona that you've been building this whole time. Or you risk being seen, not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who's still healing and processing and transforming. And it won't feel safe at first. In fact, it might feel a lot like failure in the beginning, like a weakness, if you will, almost like regression at some points. But it's not. It's actually returning. It's a returning to your body, right? It's noticing your breath. It's noticing your beating, broken, and still trying heart. That heart that has been asking for attention for many years, but has been neglected, right? You've just been silencing it with certainty. So now you're here, standing at the threshold between insight and intimacy. And you've started to question the armor. You've noticed the theory that once seemed to explain everything. And now it only explains away your pain rather than actually addressing and healing it. And you're wondering, what happens now? What happens if I put down this armor? The answer is this. You get to feel again. But first, you're going to grieve. You're going to grieve the version of yourself that you thought was being right, and that would have been enough. You're going to grieve the people who didn't see past your mask because you never let them. You're going to grieve the connection that you've missed while defending a worldview of revealing your wounds. And the grief will feel really raw. It'll feel disorienting and sometimes unbearable. But it's proof that the deeper part of you is waking up. The part that doesn't want to win arguments. It wants instead to be held. It wants to be known. It wants to say, this hurts, and not be corrected for saying that. And that's the thing about ideology as an armor. It often comes with shame, right? Because when we use ideas to protect ourselves, we're often doing so without even knowing that we're afraid. And so when someone challenges our beliefs, it doesn't just feel like disagreement. It feels like exposure, like they've touched something that we weren't ready to show, something that never felt safe to bring out in the first place. And that's why we defend so fiercely. It's not just because we believe the idea, but because we fear what might rush in if we actually let go. So let me offer this. You don't have to drop your ideas. You don't have to unlearn everything. You don't even have to reject your worldview. But you do need to ask, is this belief helping me connect? Or is it just helping me to cope? Because the best ideas are not shields. See them as invitations. They're inviting self-reflection, not self-erasing, right? These ideas, they make room for more of your story and not less of it. And the moment your beliefs start to deny your feelings, it's not truth anymore. It's a defense. So let's bring this into the real world, shall we? Maybe you're in a relationship or hoping to be in one, and every time emotional risk shows up, you retreat into theory. She's just testing me, you'll say. Or this is just the female nature. Or this proves hypergamy is real, right? Or she's just projecting. Well, maybe all of that could be true. But what if it's also just you who's scared to say, I feel unwanted right now? What if it's you remembering how much it hurt to care before, and now caring feels like giving up your power? What if all your certainty is covering up a childhood of emotional neglect, or a string of rejections, a deep belief that you're always too much or never enough? That's what this theory is protecting you from. Not women, not the world, but the ache inside your own chest. And that's where healing must go. It must go into your body, into your nervous system. It must permeate your story, because the internet can give you language, but it can't hold your grief. Your beliefs, they can help you understand the world, but they can't replace your need to be loved. And that's what this whole conversation really is all about. It's not necessarily ideas as much as it is intimacy. Because when we substitute belief for connection, we lose something sacred. We lose the chance to be fully known, not just as thinkers, but also as feelers, as humans. So, what do you do when you realize that you've been hiding behind ideas? Well, practice showing up differently. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, gently, with intention. Start by saying things like, I'm not sure what I feel but about this scenario yet, or this idea, it makes sense to me, but it also feels like I'm using it to avoid something. I need to explore a bit about that. Or when I say this, I'm not trying to win. I just want to be understood. Or you could say, I think I've been hiding how much this actually hurts for some time now. See, these are not weak statements. These are courageous statements. These statements signal to your nervous system that we are safe enough to stop hiding now. And they tell people around you, you don't have to compete with my ideology just so that you can know me. There's a person here, a soft one that is still wanting to connect. And yes, some people will not be interested in meeting you there. Some people might even prefer you in your armored presentation. Some people they might not even know what to do with your expression of tenderness or vulnerability, whereas others will exhale and they'll see themselves in you, and they'll soften as well too, and they'll start to speak from under their armor as well, and together you'll begin to build something real, not a shared ideology as much as a shared humanity. And that's more powerful than any theory will ever be. So now we arrive at the point of an invitation, not to abandon your mind, but to return to your heart. Not to throw away your ideas, but to hold them with open hands instead of like clenched fists. Not to disown your worldview, but to make sure that it leaves room for you in your full emotional human iteration. Because here's the quiet truth beneath all of this, and that is you were never meant to be known just for what you believe. You were meant to be loved for who you are. And who you are is not your ideology. You're not just your analysis. You're not just your content, or the content even that you consume. You're not just your cleverness or your critique or your curated insights. What you are is a heart that has longed to be seen. You are a body that remembers rejection. And you're a soul that is still reaching for closeness, even if you've convinced yourself that you're above it. And that part of you, the one that's still hoping, even under all the cynicism, that part is still there. It's still beating, it's still waiting, it's still wanting. Wanting what though? It's wanting to be met and to be held and to be witnessed in your unguarded state. Not because you said the perfect thing, but because you've said the real one. That's the radical thing that you can do in a world of ideological posturing. Tell the truth about what it is that hurts. Because once you do that, the armor starts to lose its grip. And you no longer need to explain everything. You no longer need to win. And you no longer need to turn away every emotional bruise into this philosophical argument. But instead you start to feel. And feeling makes you present, right? And being present makes you knowable. And that's where connection actually begins. Not in being seen as smart, not in being smarter than others, but in being known as who you are. Let's make this practical. If you've been living inside your emotional armor for a while now, the path forward is not to destroy it, but it's to soften it, to thank it for what it protected you from all this time. to acknowledge what it carried for you, right? And then to let it rest. And that might mean you're writing down the moment that you first stopped feeling and started explaining. It might mean that you're calling a friend and saying, there's something I've been afraid to admit. And it might mean looking in the mirror and whispering, you're allowed to feel again. You don't have to be right to be worthy. These are not grand declarations. They're gentle reclaimings of your inner world, of your emotional authority. The reclamations of your right to be held, not as an idea factory, but as a feeling human being. And once you reclaim that, the way you speak begins to change. The way you love changes. And the way that you allow yourself to be loved in a deep and honest and non-theoretical way, that begins to shift. And you stop asking, do they agree with me? And instead you start asking, do they see me? Because that's what you've been craving all along. Not someone to share your ideas per se, but someone to actually share your life and your experiences with, to sit with you in the grief, not just to quote a study about it, right? To witness you in your loneliness and not just label it, and to offer their presence and not just their opinions. That's what intimacy feels like. It doesn't start in theory, it starts in the feeling department. So if this episode did anything, I hope it gave you at least this. I hope it gave you permission to feel again, permission to let down the brilliant defenses that you've had this long time, permission to unclench your certainty, permission, if you will, to be seen without explanation. Because you, just as you are worthy of being known. Not because you're right, but because you're real. And realness, that's the only bridge that ever leads back to love. So take the risk. Soften the armor. And let someone see what lives beneath your brilliance. And you'll discover something that's wild and healing, and that is that you never needed to be sharper to be safe. You just needed space to be soft. And that's what love is. That's what connection invites. That's what the world is still aching for. Not more arguments, just more honest hearts that are willing to feel, willing to risk, and willing to be seen. That's what helps this bridge back to us. We got this.